The request from the Empire was not unusual in its wording, but it carried the weight of command. When the message arrived at the human delegation's quarters on Varen Station, it bore the Imperial seal, a demand for demonstration. The Empire wished to see for themselves what kind of weapons these newcomers, these humans, could produce. It was the sort of demand that cloaked a threat, a reminder that the Empire tolerated guests but expected obedience. Among the delegation, there was little doubt about the intent. The Empire saw them as primitives, backwater colonists barely out of their cradle world. They had arrived without fleets of warships or arrays of energy weapons, carrying instead fragile transports and meager supplies. The Imperials, with their war machines and legions of armored soldiers, wanted confirmation of superiority. A demonstration, they said, proof, they implied, that humans understood war. When the humans agreed, they sent one fighter. No great general, no scientist or engineer, but a soldier chosen for restraint and adaptability. His name, at least to the Imperial record, was Commander Hale. He wore no armor when he arrived at the appointed chamber, no ceremonial garb, only a plain flight suit patched from long service. His boots were scuffed, his hair trimmed without care, his eyes steady. The Imperial guards who escorted him into the chamber smirked at the sight. The room itself betrayed little preparation. By bureaucratic accident or design, the chamber selected for the demonstration was no armory or arena but a lecture hall once used for cadet instruction. Tiered rows of benches faced a long chalkboard. Desks sat bolted together, worn from years of restless training. There were projection units along the wall, inert for lack of power. It was an academic room, not a place of war. Imperial officers had gathered regardless, draped in black and silver uniforms that gleamed under the artificial light. Their expressions varied: impatience, disdain, curiosity. They had expected the humans to produce something impressive, some weapon hidden aboard their transports, something to justify recognition. Instead, what they saw was a lone man in a bare room. "Where's the weapon?" asked Prefect Vorel, a tall, rigid figure whose metal spanned his chest. His tone dripped with derision. "Do not tell me you intend to lecture us with chalk." Hale scanned the room slowly, saying nothing. His gaze lingered on the desks, the boards, the piles of forgotten scrap in the corner. The silence stretched long enough to become uncomfortable. "Your request was for demonstration," Hale said at last. His voice was low, even. "You will have it." He moved toward the nearest desk, kneeling beside it. At first, the Imperials assumed he was stalling. They muttered, exchanging amused glances. When he produced a small multitool from his belt, a simple human device of hinges and blades, they laughed openly. "He brings a knife to please us," Vorel said, shaking his head. "This is your species' answer to the Empire." Hale ignored them. He worked steadily, prying free the long backboard of the desk. The wood creaked under pressure, bolts snapping loose. He tested its flex, running his hand along the grain. Then he placed it aside and reached for a length of discarded metal tubing near the corner. Piece by piece, he assembled components as though this classroom had been prepared for him. The laughter waned. A few of the junior officers leaned forward, whispering. They watched as Hale bent the wood carefully, shaving thin strips from its edge, binding them with fibers pulled from seat cushions. From the metal scrap, he fashioned arrowheads, crude yet sharp. The shaft of each arrow came from disassembled chair legs. He worked methodically, without hurry, as though he had done this before. In less than an hour, the shape was clear: a bow, bent from furniture, strung tight with cord stripped from the projector mountings. Arrows, 6 in number, lay finished at his feet. Hale rose, holding the bow with practiced familiarity. The Imperials no longer laughed. "Primitive nonsense," one colonel muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. Hale regarded the room. At the far end, near the chalkboard, stood a lectern of solid composite wood. He drew an arrow from the small bundle, knocked it smoothly, and drew the string back. Muscles corded in his arms, shoulders tightening. For an instant, time seemed to hold. Then he released. The arrow flew across the hall, striking the lectern with a heavy crack. It embedded halfway into the surface, quivering. The officers startled at the force. Hale was already drawing another. He loosed again, this time striking the edge of a metal chair. The point punched through with a sound like tearing cloth, the shaft vibrating with energy. By the third shot, silence had overtaken the hall. The sixth arrow struck dead center on a painted crest above the chalkboard. It landed with such precision that a sliver of paint flaked down onto the floor. Hale lowered the bow and let the silence linger. "You asked for a demonstration," he said, his voice carrying clearly now. "This is a weapon. But the weapon is not wood. Not string. Not metal. The weapon is necessity and the hand that answers it." For a moment, no one moved. The Imperials stared at the crude bow as though it was some artifact from another age, yet the power in it was undeniable. They had expected energy rifles, plasma cannons, something they could compare on their scale of might. What they received was a reminder that destruction could be wrought from scraps. Prefect Vorel's face had hardened, his amusement long gone. "You expect us to fear toys," he demanded, but his voice faltered. Hale did not answer. He set the bow down gently upon the desk, then stood with hands loose at his sides. His expression betrayed nothing. Neither triumph nor defiance, only calm. The silence thickened again, broken only when one junior officer whispered too loudly. He made that from nothing. Vorel turned on the whisperer, glare sharp as a blade, but the words had already lodged in every mind present. From nothing, in an environment devoid of armories, denied the weapons they had expected, a human had built one anyway. Not a toy, but a killing tool. The demonstration ended with no applause, no laughter. The guards escorted Hale from the room, but none dared mock him now. Their eyes followed the crude bow still resting on the desk, the arrows lodged in wood and steel. What unsettled them was not the weapon's power, it was its existence at all. In the corridors outside, Hale walked without expression, though his heart still thudded with exertion. He knew the Empire had not sought truth, only confirmation of weakness. Yet he also knew what they had seen, a lesson they had not asked for but could not ignore. Behind him, in the silent chamber, officers whispered with unease, some masking it with scorn, others with forced laughter. But each had seen how swiftly scraps had become threat, and each understood, if only dimly, that to face such people in war meant facing an enemy who would never be unarmed. The bow remained on the desk long after the humans had departed. No one dared touch it. The chamber where the bow still rested had become a quiet place of pilgrimage in the hours following the demonstration. Officers came and went, each pausing to look at the crude construction as though it might reveal more upon inspection. Some sneered and dismissed it aloud, but none dismissed it privately. Every glance betrayed unease. The bow was not dangerous compared to the armories of the Empire, yet its very presence unsettled the confidence they carried so naturally. In the High Council Hall, Prefect Vorel stood before the dais of governors, recounting what he had witnessed. His tone attempted disdain, but the edge of his words betrayed the truth. It was a child's contraption, assembled from refuse. Yet it pierced steel. That is the sum of their demonstration. Governor Telnar, robed in crimson and gold, leaned forward, eyes sharp. "And what conclusion do you draw from this?" Vorel hesitated. "That they are improvisers, dangerous only in the absence of true weapons." A murmur of dissent rippled through the chamber. One of the junior strategists, a woman named Relis, spoke with uncharacteristic boldness. "With respect, Prefect, that is precisely what makes them dangerous. A soldier bound to a supply chain can be predicted. But what of one who forges a weapon wherever he stands? That is no weakness. It is a kind of strength we do not measure." Vorel's jaw tightened. He would not admit that her words struck him, but the silence in the hall proved they had struck the others. Beyond the council debates, Hale sat in a holding chamber assigned to the human delegation. He neither celebrated nor brooded. His mind replayed the demonstration, not for its outcome but for the principle behind it. Necessity had shaped every motion. He knew the Imperials sought a spectacle and had instead been given a parable. Whether they understood it or not would decide much of humanity's future among them. That evening, Relis requested a private audience with him. Against protocol, it was granted. She entered the holding chamber with none of the pomp of her peers, carrying only a datapad and a curious expression. "You confounded them," she said without preamble. "Do you know that?" Hale regarded her evenly. "I showed them what you asked to see." "What they asked," she corrected, What they wanted was confirmation that your people are irrelevant. Instead, they saw you build danger from scraps. They are not accustomed to being unsettled. Hale said nothing. Silence, he had learned, often spoke more sharply than words. Relis studied him a moment longer. Do all humans share this reflex? If we do not, we perish, Hale answered simply. The truth of that lingered in her thoughts long after she departed. Meanwhile, the governors argued deep into the night. Some insisted humans were little more than clever primitives, their improvisation impressive but meaningless before plasma weaponry. Others insisted that unpredictability itself was a weapon the Empire could neither measure nor anticipate. The debate turned from technical to political, for to acknowledge human resourcefulness was to admit vulnerability. And vulnerability was forbidden in Imperial doctrine. When the final vote was cast, the decision was not unanimous but decisive. The humans would be recognized, cautiously, as a martial species. They would be monitored, trained under Imperial oversight, perhaps integrated into auxiliary forces. But beneath the official decree ran an undercurrent of fear, unspoken yet palpable. For the first time in decades, the Empire had seen ingenuity it did not command. Hale learned of the decision the next morning. The delegation was summoned to hear the verdict, their presence ceremonial. The governor's words were as polished as marble: recognition, honor, conditional partnership. Yet Hale caught the undertone. To the Empire, recognition meant containment. They feared what they could not control. That fear spread quietly through the ranks of the officer corps. Soldiers whispered of the human who had turned a classroom into an arsenal. Some dismissed it as theatrics, but others imagined battlefields where such minds roamed free. A soldier with nothing could still fight. A soldier stripped of weapons could still kill. That was a thought none could dismiss easily. For Hale, the consequence was subtler. He carried no triumph, only a growing awareness of the path now set before his people. To be feared was not the same as being respected. Fear could protect, but it could also provoke. He wondered which the Empire would choose in time. Relis returned once more before Hale departed the station. She spoke more carefully this time, her voice lowered. They do not understand what you meant, not fully. Some believe you showed them a curiosity, but I think you showed us a warning. Hale regarded her with the same steady calm. A lesson, he said. Weapons are never in the object. They are in the hand, and the mind behind it. And if they forget that lesson, she asked. His answer was quiet, almost gentle. Then they will learn it again, at cost. When he left the station, the bow remained behind, locked within a display case by order of the governors. Officially it was to be studied, a specimen of human ingenuity. Unofficially it was to be watched, as though the object itself might whisper danger. Officers passed it with wary glances. Cadets whispered tales of the human who had made it. The bow became more than wooden string. It became symbol. Symbols are dangerous things in empires built on certainty. In the weeks that followed, Imperial reports tracked human activities with new scrutiny. The humans continued their negotiations, their settlements, their cautious exploration of alliance. Yet every record carried the shadow of that day's demonstration. Hale's name appeared often, though he had returned quietly to his duties. Some reports called him innovator, others called him threat. Few could decide which was truer. What none could erase was the image of arrows thudding into steel. That image lingered in memory and rumor, reshaping how humans were spoken of across the stations and outposts. Not as primitives, not as weak, but as something less predictable and perhaps more enduring than the Empire wished to admit. And so the demonstration ended not with applause nor dismissal, but with a question. The Empire, vast and armed with fleets that could scour worlds, had glimpsed a species that survived by turning scarcity into strength. They could contain it, command it, fear it, but they could not unsee it. For Hale, that was enough. He had not come to impress nor to threaten, only to show. The rest would unfold as all things did, in the choices of those who believed themselves masters of fate. The Empire believed they had learned all they needed from one bow fashioned in a classroom. They were wrong. The lesson had only begun.